Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. If you're joining us online, you're here in person, good to see you this Sunday. So what if I told you I could renovate this house into this house? Or this bathroom into this bathroom? Well, I'd be totally lying because I have never had any experience in construction or design. But what if I told you I had a couple in mind who I think who could help you? This couple right here, Chip and Joanna Gaines. Now, I don't know the Gaines personally. I wish I did because they're pretty awesome. But I feel like they have enough experience to handle a renovation like this. We could totally trust them, right? And when you start to think about trust is something that is pretty much everywhere in our lives. It plays a crucial role in our lives, particularly when it comes to relationships. If you want to have a deep relationship with someone, you need to have deep trust in that relationship. And that is true also of our relationship with God. And the reason that I started thinking about this was last week, Pastor Mike has been going through the book of James, and he just kind of shared again to us that spiritual maturity has a lot to do with being able to trust God, particularly when we don't understand what's going on or when we have questions. And so I thought this was a good opportunity for us really just to pause and consider, again, trust in our lives. Because again, this is a crucial aspect in our lives. And to ask some questions afresh of ourselves about where our ultimate trust lies. And to help us do that, we're going to jump into just a few verses in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 12. So let me read these for you, starting in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. We're going to touch on each of these just very briefly here. But let's begin at the beginning. Trust in the Lord. And it's almost like the writer is giving us just a statement for the whole passage as a whole. It's a bit of a summary. It's a motto to live by, if you will. It's something that you probably want to stick on your fridge. But it also it tells us something and reminds us of something. Because trusting in the Lord is something that is a major theme within the scriptures. And there's a good reason for that. It's because we often have a tendency to put our ultimate trust in things that are not God. When it comes to finding security and peace about our future, when it comes to needing provision for the present, it's easy to put our ultimate trust in our bank account or our retirement funds, our relationship, our reputation, or our health. And yet one thing all of those things have in common is that they're all subject to change. Jobs change, markets fluctuate, people let us down, we make mistakes, sickness comes. The writer is reminding us and encouraging us that the only thing we can trust to be 100% unchangeable and 100% dependable is God. He's the only one worthy of our ultimate trust. Now, this might sound like an obvious, being Captain Obvious here in terms of just saying, trust in the Lord. Great, Will. Got that one. I'm going to walk out of here. But here's the thing. This is actually quite a challenging thing to put into practice. This is a great opportunity for us to ask some questions of ourselves that, what are you ultimately relying on? What's your safety net, as it were? Where do you turn when things get difficult? God is inviting us afresh to turn from temporary, changeable things that we often look to for security and peace and instead trust in him. So let's continue on in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. You know, I remember the first time that I went to New York City, and I have to say that it was totally overwhelming, totally captivating. You can imagine from an Irishman coming from a seaside town of like 5,000 people, you know, it was just like crazy. But you know, one thing that was really helpful in that visit was that we had a friend who actually lived in Manhattan. And she just knew her way around the city. It was almost like she knew it like the back of her hand. She was able to, you know, navigate traffic in particular ways, avoid particular areas. She knew the right places to go at the right times. Honestly, it was a game changer, really, for our trip. And I think this is what I think of when I look at these verses. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. You see, I had neither the knowledge or the experience to navigate my way through Manhattan. Sure, I could have attempted it based on whatever limited information I had, but to have somebody who had like a bird's eye view of the city almost, someone who knew the right roads and the right places to go and the places to avoid, it turned out to be priceless. And so drawing it back to our passage, who better to trust to help you navigate through this journey of life than the Lord of the universe? Who better to help you determine the right paths to take and the ones to avoid than the one who crafted you? Who better to guide you through this often complicated life than the one who sees all and knows all? Can your family and your closest friends do this for you? To a degree, but definitely not perfectly. Put your ultimate trust in him. Lean on him. I have to say that, personally speaking, this has been one of the most comforting things that I found in my relationship with God. I remember being in my late teens, early 20s, and you know, there was so much unknown ahead. There was so much potential in the years ahead, it felt. And yet I had very little clarity in terms of what I really wanted to do, what I felt like God was leading me toward. But to have the truth and the reality that I was made by God, that I'm loved by him, that he has purpose for my life, that he has a kingdom that he wants me to be part of and to help him build, and that he was willing to guide me. This literally changed the course of my life. And you can experience that too. The writer continues this theme of trusting in verse 7. He says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." In the Message, Eugene Peterson, he paraphrases it simply. He says, "Don't assume that you know it all." I mean, talk about another one to stick on your fridge. Don't assume that you know it all. Be suspicious of when you think you've got it right in every area of your life. Because listen, if we are to trust God wholeheartedly, we must humbly acknowledge the limitations of our perspective and our gut instincts. And I understand that this kind of message is in many ways countercultural to what we hear today. You know, a modern day proverb might more likely read something like this: lean on your own understanding. Trust your intuition. Let your inward desires be your outward compass. The best person to lead you is you. Now contrast that with what we read in verses 6 and 7, and we find two very different outlooks when it comes to who we should ultimately trust. Should that ultimate trust lie in God, or should we look to ourselves? And this conflict isn't anything new. We actually see it all the way through the Bible and throughout history. But going back to the very beginning, in the beginning there was a deep trust that existed between God and humankind. He spoke, they trusted. He led, they followed. But soon the serpent approached Adam and Eve and planted seeds of doubt regarding God's trustworthiness, you see. The serpent made them doubt God's motives and that he knew what was best for them. Instead, he set this narrative before them. You decide what's right and wrong. You take the lead. And that narrative has continued and been whispered throughout the centuries, even to the present day. But imagine I'd taken that advice in New York City. I just walked into the city and I was just like, you know what? My friend, I think I'm good. I'm just going to jump on in here and see what happens. It probably would have been a pretty much of a disaster. And as I've shared before, my geographical know-how is awful. Never ask me for directions. But listen, for Adam and Eve and for the Israelites, for the early church, misplaced trust always led to relational disconnect with God and much pain in their lives. And so the writer here, he encourages, do not be wise in your own eyes. Now, a caveat here, he's not saying that we should cast aside all our thoughts and our preferences and our instincts. But, and this is critical, he is warning us about thinking and living with no checks and balances but yourself. That's the danger of pursuing independence from God. We are being invited to come under God's way of thinking and doing, to let God inform and guide our instincts and our actions. In other words, looking at the end of verse 7, fear the Lord and shun evil. I've had people ask me about this word fear. It just feels like such a weird concept. Like, what is this thing of like fearing God? Maybe it helps to put it this way. When the Bible talks about fearing God, it's not the type of fear that paralyzes us, like a fear of spiders or thunderstorms or a fear of the dark. But rather, it's the kind of fear that propels us forward into deeper trust of Him. It's a healthy kind of fear that takes the shape of reverence and obedience. And fear of God, it actually begins with recognizing who He is. That's where it starts. In Isaiah 40, the prophet Isaiah is speaking to Israel, and he describes God in this way, with a series of questions. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of His hand, or with the breadth of His hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as His counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, or who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge or showed him the path of understanding? I love this. These are all poetic, rhetorical questions. Isaiah is not looking for an answer. He already knows the answer. And the collective answer is no one. The Lord stands alone. God and Creator, all-powerful, all-knowing. He sustains and holds the cosmos this morning as we sit in here. The breath that you took just a moment ago, sustained, provided by Him. And this can evoke reverent fear in us. But it should also reinforce our trust in Him. Because when we learn more of who He is, it can kind of fan the flame of faith in Him. To the point that we echo the words of Peter to Jesus. We say, where else would I go? He said to Jesus, where else would I go? You alone hold the words of life. And we think, who else would I put my trust in but God? Who is more powerful, more faithful, more wise, more trustworthy than He? Remember the house renovation project I mentioned at the beginning? So why would you trust Chip and Joanna over me? I mean, apart from that they're lovely people. They have the experience, the wisdom, the ability, the perspective, the resources to knock that project out of the park. It makes total sense that you would put your trust in them over me. And so I ask you, who is more qualified or worthy of your trust than God alone? In verse 8, we move from the what to the why of trust. And we learn that trusting in God in this way can bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. We don't have time to go into that. I think that's a general statement. This is not promising some sort of prosperity gospel of like you trust in God, you're going to be healthy all the time. That's for another sermon. But what he is saying is when our ultimate trust rests in God, we in turn find rest in him. Jesus put it this way: "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." We find rest when we rest in God's leadership. But it's important for us to remember that there's a bigger purpose behind our trust than just receiving from God. In fact, I would say that the primary reason for our trust in God is not so much for our benefit, but actually for his glory. Because when we trust in him, when we submit to him, when you give God creative license in your life, others get to see the work of the one true God. It's almost like your life becomes a canvas, a blank canvas essentially, whereby the power of God can be seen and witnessed, his goodness, strength, mercy, and faithfulness. So when we trust in God, we receive from him, we find rest in him, but more importantly, he is glorified. Verse 9 and 10, they get kind of practical here. This is just one example of where the rubber hits the road here. Starting in verse 9, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, and your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine." Now remember, at this time, many people's livelihood and employment came from working the land. So it was important not only for just monetary income, but also for basic survival. They were selling things, but they were also consuming them. And so this really was a way of honoring God as the ultimate giver. But it was also a way of just simply saying that they trusted God. I've been here for almost 5 years, and one thing that has been just remarkable for me is the generosity of the people here at the Ridge. I don't just mean financially, I mean in terms of time and giving of their gifts. Now, why do we give to God? We give because we want to honor him, yes. We give because it's something he's invited us or commanded us to do, yes. But beyond that, I think it's a tangible way of showing deep trust in him. It's a way of saying, God, sometimes this doesn't even make logical sense that I would technically live off of less, but I trust you. This is all coming from you. I'm just giving back to you. It acknowledges him as the ultimate giver, but when we give back to God, we also acknowledge him as the ultimate multiplier. That he can take what we give and increase its impact and reach infinitely more than we ever could. When it comes to our finance, when it comes to our time, when it comes to things that we're good at, we can trust God. Be open-handed with those kind of things. It's all coming from him anyway. You're just giving back what is rightfully his. So I got to confess to you guys that I absolutely hated discipline when I was a kid. Who likes discipline? But at school, teacher calling you out about stuff, it just hit me right in the heart. And my parents actually had like a kitchen wooden spoon that would occasionally be referenced. Should I be stepping out of line? The wooden spoon, it was like a warning kind of thing. And I actually ended up burying that wooden spoon in our backyard. I'm proud of it. I'm not going to say I'm not. I don't even know where it is, I have to say, to this day. But my parents know it. I confessed it to them, so don't worry about that. But who enjoys discipline, really? And yet, in verse 11, this is what we read. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. The Lord disciplines us. As a loving father. 2 quick questions here. What does that even look like? Is there some sort of divine wooden spoon? Is it lightning bolt? Like, what is that? What is that concept of being disciplined by the Lord? It's not something we often think about much. And then second, what does discipline have to do with trust? Since that's what we're really talking about here. In terms of God's disciplining of you, I think there's various avenues. One, an obvious one, I don't know if you ever had this, where you feel like a scripture like hits you right in the nose almost. It challenges you in a particular mindset or behavior or something that you've said. I think God can speak through others. It's another obvious one. Through those closest to us. There's another proverb that says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. God can discipline us through the words of others. But there's another one I think that we need to be open to. I would consider it to be something like a holy unsettling, whereby it's the work of the Holy Spirit in us, if we're open to it. Just giving us a sense that there's something that needs addressed, something that needs confessed. And often it happens post something. You go and you say something to your spouse, you say something to a family member or a friend or a situation in work, and you walk away. And if we're open to it, even in those moments, we can trust God's discipline of us, his rebuke of us. And why can we trust him? We read it right here, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. But what has this got to do with trust? Turns out it has a lot to do with trust, in fact, because if we're to willingly receive discipline from someone in a healthy way, we have to trust that they know what's best and that their judgment is correct. We have to trust that the discipline itself is proportionate to the failure, that it's fair. But we also have to trust their motive for disciplining us. And I understand that for some of us, we received discipline from parents or guardians that was more of an unhinged emotional outburst than something constructive and responsive. But we can trust the Lord's discipline. Maybe you've never prayed that prayer before. Of, Lord, I am open to your discipline. I want to be challenged by you. I want to be shaped by you. I want to be convicted by you when I need it. Perhaps that's a prayer that we can pray this morning, trusting in his love for us. So recently I've been watching reruns of a show called Running Wild with Bear Grylls. I don't know if some of you have seen it. Bear is a TV adventurer, and he leads celebrities out in the back end of nowhere, jungles, canyons, glaciers, that kind of thing. And he just has them doing like all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's always interesting, like if you had asked the celebrities, like right at the beginning of the show, like, do you trust Bear? I think they'd be like, well, yeah. I mean, I've seen a few of his shows and read some of his books and heard some interviews. He seems to know a lot about survival and things like that. But what about when they're hanging off a 300-foot cliff, tethered to nothing but like a small tree? How do you think they'd answer then? The reality is, saying we trust God is the easy part. But backing off a cliff with God, facing the unknown or the unexpected with God, that's much harder. For some of you this morning, maybe you feel like you trusted God with something. You trusted that he would protect, that he would heal, that he would provide in some way. But God didn't answer your prayers in the way that you'd hoped or expected. I'm aware that those experiences can have an impact on our trust that can take time to work out. We can't always understand why things are the way they are, why things have happened the way they have. But we can't talk about trust and not talk about these kinds of experiences, because these are the very environments for which trust was built. See, where there is trust, there's always going to be questions or mystery. You say you trust Chip and Joanna Gaines with your renovation, and yet you walk in on demo day and you see nothing but destruction, and you're thinking to yourself, what in the world? Like, where is this going? This looks more like ruins than renovation. But you trust them, right? You trust them, even despite what you're seeing. If everything was clear and we had answers to everything, we wouldn't actually need trust. But what we can say is that in the midst of our questions, confusion, and uncertainty, God has proven himself worthy of our ultimate trust. We have a cross in our worship center here, and we have a cross outside of our building. And I know I've said this before, but the cross, it speaks to our salvation, but it also gives a resounding statement about who God is. It's a constant reminder, a monument in history of his love, of his power, of his mercy. It's also a constant reminder to us, a place that we can look to as a reminder that we can trust him. And it's not only Jesus' sacrifice, but the person of Jesus, his life. When you think about it, we find in Jesus not only our Savior, but the one who knows what it is to trust the Father. We find one who knows what it means to submit all his ways to the Father. He knows what it means to wrestle over the Father's way and yet trust him anyway. He knows what it means to resist temptation and to honor God with everything that he had. See, in Jesus, we have one who fully understands us, and yet also one in whom we can fully trust. So I encourage you to respond afresh to this invitation this morning. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Make him your ultimate trust in your life, not your bank account, not your retirement funds, not relationships, not your health, but him. Don't rely solely on your own understanding, but in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight.